Welcome back, everyone, to Data Analytics Chat, where we discuss different topics in the ever-evolving AI and data science world. Today, I'm still in Bali, so I do apologise if any technical issues, but fingers crossed it all goes well. So I'm excited today I do a lot of myself hiring in this field. So we're going to look at the impact of AI and generative AI in the insurance sector. Delighted to welcome Gabriel Berardi, who's a data expert that has worked in several insurance companies. So welcome, Gabriel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Glad to be on your podcast.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to see you. So do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Gabriel Berardi, as you already mentioned. I'm originally from Switzerland, but I've been living in Germany for the past 7 years or so. My background is in insurance and finance. So I studied business with a focus also on the financial and insurance industry. And I've then also done a master's degree in data analytics. So kind of a mixed academic background between insurance and data analytics, especially. And I've worked for Allianz for many years, especially in Germany, both in Frankfurt and Munich, different data and also some non-data related areas. Also worked some time as a self-employed data analyst and consultant. And in my most recent role, I've been working for a software startup, also in the insurance field. And at the time we're recording this, I'm actually soon going to be joining another insurance carrier, also again as a data and BI expert. So I think you can tell I have quite a huge interest both for insurance, for data analytics, also innovation in general. So again, really happy to be on your show, and thanks for having me.
I think obviously insurance is one of them fields where there's been a massive impact, isn't there? Obviously back in, I guess, previously insurance sector was legacy applications, and then obviously there's been a massive boom, and there continues to be a massive impact in the field. And then also, I think it's one of them, obviously, it's good that you've got an interest in the field, because that's, I guess, from my point of view, the challenges within insurance is they want people that have got that insurance knowledge already to really drive and innovate businesses forward. So that's good to see you've got a passion there. So let's dive into the first question. So can you explain how AI and generative AI is currently being used in the insurance industry?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, you've already mentioned it, data analytics, AI, Gen AI, it's a huge topic in the insurance industry. And there are probably, dozens or hundreds of potential use cases how you could use AI and also Gen AI, which I see as a subset of AI, right? If you think about it, like the insurance industry is sort of, all about data, right? Insurance companies, the whole insurance industry have been dealing with data for, in some cases, hundreds of years. So like gathering data about the real world, analyzing it, building statistical models, and so on. So it's quite obvious that there must be quite a lot of use cases for AI in this area that is so, let's say, innovation and information driven. So let me maybe just mention a few use cases. Maybe we can go into a bit more detail later on to some of them. So for both, let's call it like maybe traditional AI as well as Gen AI. So I think the first example that would come to my mind how you could use AI and Gen AI in insurance would probably be around claims, right? So claims is often called the moment of truth in insurance. You have customers paying for their premium for many years, and they rely and they also trust the insurance company, to be there in case something goes wrong. So when a claim really happens, it's of course a very important moment for the customer journey in insurance. So in claims management, I think that AI can definitely, streamline this whole process, the whole procedure. So, for example, when a customer, right, files a claim, AI can help to automatically, assess the damage by analyzing, all sorts of data about this claim, like the text, the description from the customer. Maybe in some cases when the claim is filed via, phone, there could be some audio that can be analyzed. Of course, photos or videos even is often there. And that may be also connected to all the other available information about the customer, about the contract history and so on. So AI can analyze that, and it can then also estimate, what is the cost for this claim? Like what is the, for example, repair cost in the case of a motor insurance product? And, if the claim amount is not too big, it's not too large. It could even approve claims, without any human intervention. So of course, the benefit of that is quite obvious, right? It speeds up the process, which could traditionally take days, maybe weeks, sometimes even longer, to just a few minutes or seconds even. And yeah, this is I would say, win-win situation, right? Both for the insurance company, they save money, they save basically, the time that a claims handler needs to work on this claim, and then obviously also for the customer who can get money in his pocket faster. So this is just one example where, let's say, traditional AI can be used. If I think about Gen AI, of course, a really exciting area at the moment. There's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of hype also at the moment, but if you look below the surface, there is really some really interesting stuff going on there. So we probably all know by now, right? Gen AI, I see it as a subset of AI, as I said, and create, new content, can create text, images, video, audio, can also create simulations, right? Which could be interesting, also based on the data that's learned from. So for Gen AI, one exciting application I see would be in customer service, obviously, right? I think it's a really important one because I'm not sure about your experience or the experiences of your listeners, but the customer service in insurance is definitely, let's say, it has some room for improvement, right? So with Gen AI, we can offer customers, for example, really powerful chatbots, right? It's the first example that will come to mind. Some chatbots that can provide, support 24/7 around the clock to customers, handle inquiries about policy details, provide updates on claim status, or maybe also guide the customer through the claims process and so on. So I think this, of course, would be great, again, for both sides, for the customer, who, again, saves a lot of time waiting in maybe a hotline of an insurance company, but also for insurance company, again, who can reduce the workload for human employees. And then maybe just one example really quick. So I think AI and Gen AI can also, and is also being used heavily in fraud detection, right? So insurance fraud is a huge problem. In 2023 in Germany alone, I think the damage from insurance fraud was somewhere around 6 billion euros. And obviously, this is not only a problem and it's not only harm for the insurance company, but in fact, it's a problem for all of the policyholders, for the whole insurance collective, right? So because obviously, if you have insurance fraud, the premium gets more expensive for everybody. So again, here we can use AI and also Gen AI, analyze patterns and discrepancies in both the structured data about the claim, but also the unstructured data, as I mentioned. And then we could use AI to basically flag potential fraudulent claims. And you could then have like an expert to investigate those cases more deeply. So maybe just from a very high level perspective, a few examples of how I think you can use AI and Gen AI in insurance.
Yeah, no, it's good you discuss the fraud. I've seen a fair few posts, especially on LinkedIn, around motor insurance skyrocketing. So no, it's good that obviously it can minimise this, which is obviously great for, I guess, both insurance carriers and then also obviously people.
Exactly.
As well. Yeah. So obviously, what are the main challenges you face then in implementing these AI and Gen AI solutions for the insurance sector?
Yeah, good question. I mean, insurance is, of course, a very highly regulated environment, right? So if you want to use AI in this field, it comes with maybe more challenges than in some other areas. I would say probably the first and the main challenge would be the regulation itself, right? So especially around data privacy and security laws. So when we use AI, but especially Gen AI, we need to make sure that the data is handled securely, and of course also in compliance with laws like GDPR in Europe, but also upcoming AI Act in the EU will be a huge topic. And of course, a large proportion, a large chunk of the data in insurance deals with personal data, with personal information, right? So in some cases also especially sensitive data, like financial data, medical information, etc. So this certainly poses a huge challenge for AI in this field. And, in reality, it often just comes along with a lot of investigation, like upfront investigation, a lot of legal paperwork that needs to be done. And of course, also the consulting of legal experts before you start. I would say alongside the regulation issue, there's also a bit connected to that, I would say, is trust and transparency, right? So I mentioned before, right? The policyholders, the customers of insurance companies, they basically trust the insurer to be there if there's a problem, if there's a claim, if there's a damage. So when you make decisions in insurance with the help of AI systems, those decisions need to be explainable, right? So basically insurance companies need to be able to explain to customers and also to lawmakers, to regulators, how certain decisions were made in the process. So it's about those stakeholders that need to trust both the fairness and also the accuracy of these models. Yeah. And of course, this is especially important when AI is used for tasks like assessing claims or setting premium levels. So I think the topic of explainability and interpretability in general of AI models, I mean, it has been a big topic, but when it comes to Gen AI and, for example, LLMs, those models tend to be much harder to be, interpretable or explainable. So I think this is a big challenge, but it's also an opportunity, of course, for innovation in this area.
Definitely.
The next thing that I want to mention also from my experience in the past, seeing different insurance companies, how they deal with the data topic, I think an important challenge is also the quality and the availability of data that you use to train models, right? So your listeners probably know, right, AI systems, especially again, Gen AI systems, they require a large amount of high quality data to basically train these models effectively. And in the insurance sector, data, at least, at the time we're recording this, is often fragmented still across very different departments, different lines of business. You have, in many countries, you have like a legal requirement to separate, for example, P&Cs or property and casualty from health and life, but also on the software side, right? So systems or data is often stored in different systems that can sometimes be quite old, some legacy software, different databases, etc. So I think it's fair to say that data and insurance in 2024 is still quite fragmented, as I said, and quite, let's say, not harmonized at all. So this makes it quite difficult then, to be available for analytics use cases and to use the data for AI and to train AI models. So I think this is also why we have seen, at least I have observed in the last few years, and I think we'll also continue to see this trend, a larger focus on data engineering as well. So also a larger focus on the role of a data engineer in an AI project. Basically just making sure that the data is available at the time when you need it, in the shape you need it, in the quality that you need it. And yeah, maybe the last challenge I would mention is around the skills of the workforce, like a skill gap. So obviously, implementing AI solutions, requires quite a lot of specialized knowledge in data science, machine learning, but also then on the business side in insurance operations, so you really need to bring together this expertise. And I would say at the moment, there can be quite a significant skill gap in the current workforce in insurance. I would say especially in insurance, because insurance, let's be honest, is not always have the best image in society, right? And I would say it's often maybe a bit misunderstood. So finding good talent in insurance and attracting those experts can be a challenge for insurance companies as well. And I think it should also be mentioned here.
Yeah.
So yeah, huge potential, I would say, but also quite a number of challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think obviously insurance did have that bad name. Oh, not bad name, but it's changing now. I mean, it's a booming. Like you said, you've already got the data, so you can see the improvements and make the changes. And then I think also where you touched on sort of data engineering, I think obviously we had the Gen AI boom, but I think it's not really kicked on as everyone thought it would have, because obviously you can create these use cases, but like you said, if you've not got the data, I think most businesses are just not ready for it.
Exactly.
That's why you've seen the boom in, for me, obviously in the hiring side, is before you spent this hire data scientists and they could do the modeling, but now it's hire data engineers and we need to get the data, because it's not just an easy job, is it? Like collating all the data, and then you've got more data from different processes, like from Gen AI now, you've got even more data, haven't you? And then you need to get it in a structured way. So that adds more challenges, more hurdles, and I think obviously Gen AI has been a blessing, but then there's a lot more challenges that it's created as well.
Definitely, absolutely.
Cool. So then, obviously, on terms of with the introduction of AI and generative AI. How has that changed the way insurance products are designed and priced?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think, fundamentally, or in the very fundament of things, the way that insurance companies design and price the products has remained the same as before, I would say. So like the core principles of insurance have not been changed by that. But I think there are a few interesting nuances, let's say, and definitely still also a lot of potential in this area. So I think in general, I would probably mention 3 ways in which I believe AI and Gen AI can or could influence the product development in the insurance industry. And I think the first one would probably be the introduction of like completely new products, right? So
Yep.
maybe a more well-known example would be usage-based insurance, right? UBI. So probably like the most famous application of UBI would be something like a telematics product in car insurance, right? Basically means that you adjust the price of a car insurance policy according to the driving frequency and also the driving style of a policyholder. So obviously with artificial intelligence, it becomes more and more accessible also. It therefore also becomes easier for insurers to analyze really those huge amounts of data that modern cars, modern age vehicles can produce, and then also be able to better understand what influences the probability of an accident, and by that also then better price such risks. I think in the category of new products, there is also a very interesting thing that I recently saw from Munich Re, is that they are starting to, or at least they're planned to offer insurance products and insurance coverage for AI models, right? So basically to give risk coverage in the case where an AI model makes a wrong decision or gives the wrong information. And that's basically a risk that, well, at least some risk carriers are now looking into whether or not you can, provide risk coverage for that. Is quite interesting.
Yeah.
I think similarly, there are also more and more innovative products on the market that basically use AI, combined with, for example, sensor data. Also non-motor insurance, right? I already mentioned the telematics example. But for example, there are also already startups, right, that offer, for example, home insurance products where the policyholder basically agrees to install a special sensor near the water pipe of their house, which can then gather a lot of data and uses AI in the background to detect, and obviously in the best case also predict if there's a water damage in the pipe or if there could be a water damage in the pipe soon. So if you combine, this data from those sensors with AI to predict damages, and you also have the AI getting better and better over time, insurers can also help their customers to basically prevent such damages, right? So not having the damage occurring in the first place, right? And if you have that, you can also offer the risk coverage at a lower premium, right? So I think we'll see a lot of new and interesting, innovative products also in the insurance market that basically use AI as a core component of their offering. So you also asked about the pricing, right, of insurance products. And I think AI and Gen AI can also help actuaries in this case, to build more accurate risk simulations and risk models. So basically, this is just an evolution of the available algorithms that we have, right? So like traditionally, actuaries used a lot of generalized linear models, GLMs, and if they move towards, let's say, newer, more powerful algorithms, this will basically just also improve, let's say, just the risk pricing in insurance. And of course, they can also basically find ways to incorporate new learnings about the real world into their price adjustments, right? So here we go a little bit into the area of dynamic pricing. So, using the telematics car insurance example again, so we could imagine that if someone starts driving more safely at some point, or maybe, has basically looked at their last insurance premium invoice and realized they maybe should drive a bit more safely, obviously the AI system could and should detect this and then dynamically reduce their insurance premium. Maybe just very briefly, I think there's also an aspect of competitive pricing, right? So insurance markets, especially in Europe, become more and more competitive. So I think Gen AI tools could also, for example, analyze market trends, analyze the pricing of competitors on the market in real time, and then basically allow the company to adjust their rates in order to stay competitive. So yeah, definitely a huge area. And I think AI will definitely transform the product development in insurance, and maybe also in ways that, probably right now we cannot even predict, right?
Yeah. So you obviously touched on a bit then, the risk assessment and fraud
Mm-hmm.
detection. So how has AI impacted those areas? Just a bit more, if you could elaborate.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at the risk assessment maybe first. So I think in general, underwriters have always used models, right? Statistical models in order to assess certain risks. Especially, of course, in the commercial insurance area, this is becoming more of an individual offering as well, right? If you basically want to get insurance for a large fleet of cars, you might have an underwriter looking at your individual particular risk. So I would say with AI and Gen AI, it becomes much easier for underwriters to perform like this kind of task, this kind of risk assessment task. And it can also become more feasible to basically include non-traditional data in the process. So what I mean with non-traditional data is basically like external data factors, right? So that is from outside the contractual agreement between the insurance company and the customer. So, I don't know, things like data from social media, sensor data that we mentioned, weather data, stock market data, maybe for some products and whatnot. So basically external data is a big topic here. So in general, I definitely believe that risk assessment accuracy, has been and will continue to improve with AI simply because of the better performance of these algorithms. So the fraud detection you also mentioned, I mentioned also in the beginning, this is, of course, it's one of the most important areas for AI in insurance, or let's say at least it's an area where AI has been used for quite some time already. So it was one of the first use cases that many insurance companies looked at was actually fraud detection and anti-fraud measurements. So, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it's also very easy, to think of a business case to basically convince your stakeholders that it's probably a good idea to use, models, statistical models, AI, etc., to detect fraud, because fraud like exaggerated claims, even completely fake accidents, and so on. So it's basically easy to get the buy-in also from decision makers. So insurers have trained AI systems to detect anomalies, pattern in the data for quite some time. Obviously, here we're more maybe in the realm of traditional, like supervised machine learning. You basically use historical training data of insurance fraud cases, and you then feed them to an algorithm but I think you can also, use Gen AI, for example, again, for quick text summarization, or basically include new unstructured data, especially in the process. And overall, in this whole topic, and I think this is true for almost every area that we talked about, AI and Gen AI can also simply increase operational efficiency, right? Both in risk assessment, in anti-fraud, but also in other areas, right? Stuff like data entry that is often still done manually, initial claim reviews in the claims area, reading and summarizing police reports, other text, and so on. And this again would then free up also the time for people to work on more complex stuff, that needs maybe more decision making, or needs, let's say, natural intelligence.
I think obviously fraud detection. I mean, just from your view, does it happen a lot? Obviously, it's a big number that's been lost.
Yeah.
So do you come across it a lot in your line of work?
So I think I read recently a number that like 1 in 10 claims filing in the German insurance market is at least flagged for suspicious, potentially fraud claims that are then investigated further. So it's definitely not an uncommon thing, unfortunately. It's not often, or it's not always, that someone makes up a claim or lost completely, but it often happens that people maybe exaggerate a little bit their claim.
Okay, interesting. So I guess that's what obviously people want to know. And then obviously you mentioned one company, Munich Re, where they've looked at different new products. What I guess is can you share like a specific case study where like AI or generative AI has made a significant impact?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I think this was something that was also in the news last year in 23. So there's a company called Lemonade. Maybe for those listeners who don't know, it's a quite young insurance company from the US, an insurtech company. I believe they were founded back in 2016, so quite young for an insurance company. But they have claimed last year, and it was in the news, they have claimed to set a new world record for paying out a claim in just 2 seconds, right? So this was the claim that was in the news. And what happened in this case, right? So there was a customer of Lemonade in the UK, I believe, whose bike got stolen, right? He reported this loss to Lemonade, and then just 2 seconds later, after he reported the claim, Lemonade had already paid out the money for the stolen bike. So let's not focus too much like whether or not it was exactly 2 seconds or 5 seconds. Of course, we don't really know. We don't have a way of verifying that. But let's just say the claim was paid out really fast within a matter of a few seconds. So what needs to happen in the background for this to be possible, right? So basically the policyholder had sent Lemonade a description of the theft, a police report, and also a video that basically showed, I believe it was like the broken bicycle chain, was like lying on the ground where the bike was actually supposed to be, right? So Lemonade then uses, and they are famously like using AI algorithms to basically analyze, provide the details of such claims. So in this case, the police report, the video, the other text description of the claim. So, we already have several AI systems working together here, analyzing, text, analyzing video. And obviously they also use AI to run then again, several anti-fraud checks in the background before then automatically approving the claim, getting the payment data from the customer, and basically, pay out the claim. So I think this whole process and like the customer experience, right? So fully digital, very fast, without the hassle of having to send an email, maybe even a letter, or call the insurance company. So this is what the CEO of Lemonade also quite famously called like the how the 21st century insurance should feel like, right? And again, I think this is a good example because it's a win-win-win situation, right? It's a win for the customer who filed the claim, gets his money in his pocket as quickly, as easily as possible. It's a win for the insurance company because they save money, but it's also a win for the whole insurance collective, like for everybody, for all of the customers of this company, because basically, if the risk carrier is able to work cost effectively and save money, they are in general able to like provide insurance at a lower premium. Yeah, so I think this is it's a really cool example of how AI can be used in insurance and also the impact it really has on customers' life.
We could have had a new bike in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that would then be the next step. Yeah.
Brilliant. So obviously, there's obviously a lot happening in this space. So I mean, for the insurance industry to keep up, I mean, how can they approach training development to keep up with the rapid developments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned before, like the skill gap, right, in the current workforce. So this is definitely an immensely important topic. I think first and foremost, there will definitely be a significant focus on upskilling and also reskilling the current workforce. AI tools, I think, will become more and more integrated also into existing tools, right? So, things like, we have seen ChatGPT before, but soon there will be like Microsoft Copilot, for example, fully integrated into the Office 365 experience. We have, I don't know, Adobe Firefly, and we have GitHub Copilot. So you see like those models become more integrated into the normal software that people use. And I think it's crucial that people who work with these tools have at least a basic understanding of how these things work, right? So in the last years, we often talked about, data literacy, but I think we also need to develop AI literacy upskilling programs, right? So people need to know, for example, what is prompt engineering? How does good prompt engineering works? They need to know about the problem of like hallucinating LLMs, for example. They need to know and that an accuracy of 100% in an ML model is maybe not something that you should be too happy about, but maybe something that should make you a little bit skeptical, at least in the beginning. So I think there needs to be a lot done in this area. If we talk about training, I think another thing is also leadership training, right? So leaders and managers, decision makers in the insurance industry, they need to understand the capabilities, but also the limitations of AI in order, to make a good decision about its usage, right? So managers should learn about, looking a bit beyond the boss and the marketing, right? So what is AI? What is machine learning? What is Gen AI? In what situation do we need AI? And where we might actually also be better off with maybe a simpler model, right? So maybe not in every case you need the most sophisticated AI model. I think it's also an important aspect here the topic of ethics in AI, right? So it's very easy if you don't know how it works, or at least have a basic understanding, it's very easy to just trust everything an AI model tells you, right? And I think it's very important to develop an understanding of how biases in the training data that is used for these models will simply be incorporated into their results. So yeah, overall, I think there is definitely a huge need for training people about these new things. I think a lot can be done via self-learning online platforms. From my experience, this works quite well. Like your Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, etc. But I think there will also probably be a need for mandatory trainings, on-site group trainings, maybe even programs with universities. This is something that Allianz has also done in the past, and which work quite well. To have basically partnerships between insurance and academia, something like micro degrees that you offer, people who want to develop more into the direction of data. Or you could, organize hackathons, for example, that you open up also for people outside your industry. So yeah, definitely a huge topic.
Well, like anything, I think learning is key. Like you got, especially in this field, you got to keep learning. You can't, or your skill set is just gonna diminish because there's so much happening. And also, it's good for your brain as well, training. So, how do you measure the success and impact of these like AI and generative AI initiatives?
Yeah, I think this is it's not an easy topic. I think there are many different measures, different angles you can take if you look at an AI project or an AI initiative at large. Oftentimes, people with different backgrounds or maybe different roles would also look at it from those different angles, right? So first of all, you can look at it from let's call it technical or statistical or engineering perspective, right? So you could look at basically, performance metrics of the AI systems, accuracy, error rates, F1 scores, etc., in the productive environment. So basically looking at how well is this model actually doing in the real world. And this oftentimes, or at least traditionally, it's a bit the perspective of engineers, of data scientists, of ML engineers, etc. You can also switch a little bit, and you basically take the perspective of the user of your AI system, right? So basically ask and measure, how does the usage of the AI system actually influence for example, the customer satisfaction, right? So something like NPS, if it's used by the end customer, like a customer support chat bot, or how does it influence, for example, employee engagement, employee productivity if it's an internal AI tool. So you're not so much thinking about those technical measurements, but actually what's the impact on human people, like human lives, right? Then, of course, there's the financial aspect. It's always important. So, what's the impact, for example, on revenue or the cost? What is the return on investment for an AI system? In the context of insurance, you could, measure how an AI initiative is impacting something like the loss ratio or the combined ratio, such as specialized KPI for insurance. This is often not so easy to evaluate, of course, because you often don't have this information, at least not in the short or midterm. But I think it should be obvious, hopefully, that every initiative, every project, also AI projects, must have a positive business case behind it in the long run. And above all that, I think there are also some basic factors that basically they need to be met at all times, right? And here I'm talking again about compliance, security, but again also the topic of ethics. So obviously, this is something we should never forget. It's a dimension we should never forget when we evaluate AI initiatives.
Yeah, and that's the big one now, isn't it? Obviously, ethics is just the growing field, and obviously you've got the AI Act coming into place. There's a lot happening, and like I said, it's got to keep evolving, doesn't it? Like obviously you mentioned earlier, the data scientist role. It's more. That used to be the boom. Now it's data engineering. You've got to constantly evolve, and even skill sets are evolving. Even
absolutely,
again, going into the data engineering, that used to be more of your BI data type skills. That's going more software focused now. So everyone's got to keep evolving, really.
And it's hard to keep up at some time. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, you mentioned a lot around done on the chatbots and customer service. So how's the role human insurance agents and brokers evolved in this industry?
Yeah, it's something that, of course, also many people thought about and talked about. It's a huge fear also of people, of course. Like everyone is worried about their job being replaced by AI. Let me maybe put it this way. Like, do I think that at some point AI agents will be able to advise a customer better than a human being, like a human agent or a human broker? From a purely expertise point of view, I would say yes. But do I think that this means there will be no human agents and brokers anymore? And I would say absolutely not. I mentioned it a couple of times in our conversation, right? So insurance is really a business where trust is an extremely important factor. So trust is a crucial aspect of an insurance policy, right? So again, you pay your premium, you really you want to trust that you basically hope that the insurance company will pay your claim. So what I mean by that is that the relationship between a customer and the insurance carrier, or an agent or broker which represent the insurance carrier, should definitely not be like ignored or overlooked. So, the advisory that a human insurance agent or broker can give to a customer is basically more than just the technical insurance expertise that they offer, right? So it's also the human to human, relationship. And I think as long as the customers of insurance are human beings, I think there will be also human agents and brokers on the other side of the table as well. Now, obviously, it also depends a bit on the segment that we're talking about, right? So, for example, me personally, I purchase a lot of insurance products online, right, without talking to a human agent or broker. Things like third-party liability insurance, home insurance, etc. But for more complex products and also more expensive products, for example, in life insurance or so, I would probably also prefer to talk to an expert before.
Yeah.
And obviously the commercial space, in the commercial space, policies are huge, right? And oftentimes very complex. So I think they will definitely not disappear. So I don't know how the number of human agents and brokers will develop. They will also start using, for example, AI tools, right, to be able to advise customers better, more efficiently, etc. So I don't know about the number. It might be, might go down a bit in absolute terms, but I don't think that they will disappear anytime soon.
Yeah, I think again, it's just that you got. I think I discussed the other day about this with Jen. I think you got to treat it as sort of like you got to work with it, because you need to. You just got to work with it basically. It's not just it's not 100. It's not always going to be 100% right. It's things going to need changes, and you need that human touch, build the trust.
Exactly.
So you got to work with it, and so with your skill set, you've got to evolve with that as well. Cool. All right. Cool. And then the final question then. So what do you think in the future will be the, I guess, most impactful? What's going to be the most biggest impacts in the future of the insurance industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned in the beginning, right? I'm quite passionate about insurance. Like, insurance is an industry that is actually quite interesting. It touches so many levels and so many areas of life. So there are a lot of trends and a lot of innovations that I think will impact the insurance sector, both, let's say, technological and also non-technical or non-technological trends. Things like climate change, for example, has a huge impact on insurance. Demographical changes. I know that many societies get older and older. Trends like ESG, for example, and also maybe, smaller or more recent trends like the trend to work from home, after COVID, etc. So all of that in some way or another has an influence on insurance. But if we focus on technological trends, I will probably name 3 trends that I see. And of course, the first one will not be a big surprise, right? Is AI, artificial intelligence. You also mentioned it before. It's really crazy how quickly we humans, we get used to things. I still remember when ChatGPT came out in November 22. Everyone was so shocked. Everyone is excited about it. News were full about ChatGPT, and yeah, it was a huge step definitely for GenAI. And now, less than 2 years later, everyone has basically just accepted it. They have been getting used to ChatGPT, but other tools as well, like GitHub Copilot, DALL-E, etc. So it's very easy to forget that AI and GenAI tools that we have right now in 2024 are the worst that they will ever be. Give this technology another 5 to 10 years, and really no one knows what will be possible until then. So I definitely think that AI will continue to disrupt insurance, but quite frankly, probably every aspect of our life. So I mentioned already quite a few points now about AI and Gen AI, but let me maybe just go into a couple more in detail. So I think Gen AI will influence, especially also the way that insurance companies operate in some areas, right? So we talked about many use cases for AI also in general, but if we focus on Gen AI in particular, I think my prediction would be that it will have the biggest impact on the overall customer experience in insurance, by basically making the interaction points between a customer, a policyholder, and insurance companies easier, more accessible, more personalized also, especially in the digital space. So, we talked about chatbots before for customer support. Obviously, it doesn't stop there, right? So when Gen AI can essentially offer a cheap and easy way to make the experience of each customer more targeted to his or her individual circumstances, I think this will bring with itself probably one of the largest changes for the insurance industry as a whole. I think consumers will often maybe develop their expectations toward insurance from other industries. If more and more banks, for example, start offering real-time money transfers, which for sure also requires AI in the background, or if e-commerce platforms start using Gen AI, offering Gen AI-enabled customer support, etc., people will get used to that, and they will expect that also from their insurance provider. So I think this will definitely have a huge impact on the customer experience side of things. And then, as I mentioned before, I think another way will also be that those Gen AI tools or Gen AI models will be incorporated in more and more tools that employees in insurance companies use. So we talked about Microsoft Copilot and GitHub Copilot, but I think we will also see, in the specialized insurance software stack, we'll see Gen AI capabilities getting introduced into core insurance systems, claims management system, policy management system, etc. And obviously, this will overall just improve productivity, efficiency of insurance companies. So then maybe just very briefly, apart from AI, what are other technological trends that I see? I think a very important trend will probably be the Internet of Things, right? So this is something we have also heard a lot about in the last 10 years. It has been around for quite some time. Recently, I feel like the buzz has quieted down a little bit, but essentially, sensors become cheaper and cheaper. More and more devices nowadays have more sensors. We talked about telematics and home insurance already. If you compare, a car from 20 years ago with a car produced in 2024, the amount of sensors and therefore also the amount of data that those cars can capture and produce is insane to think about. So I think this trend will also continue to be of relevance, probably in the commercial insurance sector at first, but then also in the retail segment. And of course, here we also have a very interesting overlap, obviously, between AI and IoT. So the convergence of those technologies. Yeah, and then maybe there are other things like cybersecurity, cyber insurance, but one thing I want to mention is blockchain, because blockchain has also been quite a hype, quite a buzzword, also in the insurance space. And unlike maybe many of my colleagues, I'm personally not convinced that we will see many useful applications of blockchain in general, and obviously, or honestly, even less so in the insurance space. But there is actually one technology that uses blockchain that I think will have a huge impact also on insurance and other financial providers, and that is Bitcoin, right? So in the beginning of this year, we had approval of spot ETFs for Bitcoin in the US. BlackRock and other huge asset managers are now able to offer spot Bitcoin ETFs. So it becomes suddenly much easier for large asset managers, and insurance companies are among the largest asset managers in the world, to basically invest in this new asset class, right, which is Bitcoin. So I think this could be an interesting investment use case. So we didn't talk a lot about investment now in insurance, but I think there are also other aspects in this technology, which is Bitcoin, like Lightning Network, which could be interesting for things like micro insurance, for example, like inclusive insurance in developing countries, where you might not have access to a bank account, where you might not have access to traditional financial systems. So Yeah, definitely quite interesting times ahead.
Yeah. All right. No, it's obviously well, there's a lot you could discuss in the insurance world. There's a lot of technologies out there, even like quantum computing. You got this. There's so much out there that can make a massive impact. But no, it's good. It's good. I really enjoy your passion into the subject.
Yeah, definitely. Was great talking about it to you.
Brilliant. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, it's been great to have you on the show, and hope listeners have really enjoyed it. And I guess I'll see you all the best in your new role when you start.
Cool. Thanks a lot for having me, Ben. It was great talking to you, and all the best.
Cheers. Thanks, Gabrielle.